If you don't have a clear scope of work, your project is already off the rails and you don't even know it. I'm Brandon Lindsay with the Rehabbers Playbook, and today we're going to talk about what is a scope of work, and more importantly, why is this such a vital and core piece of your rehabbing and building process. Most construction chaos is not random. It's not just contractors being contractors or materials showing up late. It usually can be taken back to one thing, and that's not creating a real scope of work. That's why your budget keeps shifting. That's why your schedule never holds. That's why your contractors call you 10 times a day with the same questions. A solid scope of work solves all of these issues, because once you define exactly what's being built and how, you can start leading the project instead of reacting to it. This one document, your scope of work, solves all the chaos that most rehabbers live with every single day. So first of all, what is a scope of work? This might be elementary for some people, but let's start there and then we'll dive into why it's so important. Your scope of work is a written document that defines everything that's getting done on the project, whether it's being built, installed, or repaired. This is going to be item by item, exactly what's going on the project. This should include what's being done, where it's being done, who's getting it done, and it should include some information on the materials that are needed to get it done. So essentially, this connects your vision to your team so that everybody's building the same project that you have in your head. If your electrician or your GC or any other contractor does not have the same scope of work, this is just inviting change orders and delays and more headaches, which is, of course, not what we want. Why it's so important to have the correct scope of work and build it the right way. So now that we defined exactly what your scope of work is, I want to use the rest of this video to convince you guys that this is the most important document in your project management responsibilities. This is what we teach in the Rehabbers Playbook. It is the most important document. And again, in this video, I want to show you why. And before I go point by point, I'm just going to give a blanket statement that really explains everything, which is your scope of work is one document that touches everything. It touches your budget. It touches the relationship with your contractors. It touches your schedule. It touches your material orders. It touches everything. It is the central document that everything else revolves around. And that's what we're going to talk about here. So first of all, your scope of work defines your budget. It doesn't work reverse, right? One of the biggest mistakes we see people make is making a budget and then creating a scope of work around your budget. This is opposite. You should be making your scope of work and then creating your budget around it, and then going back to the scope of work if you need to make changes in order to get the best budget. Just remember this: you cannot budget what you have not defined. You cannot create a budget based on something you have not defined yet. So making a budget without a scope of work is just guessing with a spreadsheet. These are all very important things to realize. This could be one of the biggest takeaways from this video. So second, just like your scope of work defines your budget, your scope of work also defines your schedule. You cannot create a schedule and you cannot sequence your trades until you know exactly what's going on in the project. So essentially, your schedule is just your scope mapped out over time. And if you're building your scope of work the right way, you're going to be putting it in order, right? So you're going to go demo, framing, plumbing, HVAC, electrical. So it actually helps you stay on schedule, stay on track, and always know what's coming first, second, and third, and all the way through the project, right? What's coming next. And that's one of the biggest things about this business is that fogginess, right? That lack of clarity of where we're going next, right? Where are we now and where we're going next? Well, if you have a good scope of work, you can then create a great schedule and you can avoid having the lack of clarity in this business. And you can make sure that you have maximum clarity in this business. So your scope defines your budget. It defines your schedule. But let's talk about what is probably the most obvious part of your scope of work is it guides your relationships with your contractors. This is where a lot of people get in trouble. A lot of that he said, she said starts happening, where you tell the contractor to get the job done, you give them a very vague scope over text message, or even worse, you just walk the property with them and hope they have a good idea of what you have in your head. And what's going to happen is they're not going to complete it exactly the way that you were expecting. They're going to miss something. They're going to do something wrong. They might install the wrong material, etc., etc. And this is where a lot of relationships between builders and rehabbers and contractors start falling apart. So if you want to protect your relationship with your contractor, you're going to build your scope of work correctly, and you're going to make sure it has as much detail as possible without the fluff. We're very big on that. Do not fluff up your scope of work. Keep it simple. Use bullet points. Don't give them long paragraphs because, let's be honest, a contractor is not going to read that anyway. Keep it simple. Keep it concise. Make sure that they contribute to the scope of work. You just go up to them. You say, hey, should we add anything, subtract anything? What do you think of this scope of work? And that can help make sure that you guys are playing on the same team, which is a huge part of your relationships with contractors as well. So again, your scope of work really dictates the relationship that you have with your contractors, and it really helps make sure that you're always on the same team, not pointing fingers, not playing the he said, she said game. All right, and the last point we're going to talk about is your scope of work also can help you with your material orders, which we all know that during the project, one of the worst things you have to do is go back to the office and make a material list and then order that material list or request a quote and then edit the quote, then send it back for an updated quote. All that back and forth, all that time, spent in the office on the computer talking to suppliers can really put a drain on this business. But if you create a great scope of work up front, you can make sure that throughout the process, you already have all of that information, or at least a majority of that information ready to go for when you want to order that material. So your scope of work is going to help you with material orders, making sure you have exactly what you want in the quantity that you want, when you want, without the headache. The headache is much bigger than I think a lot of people realize. I'm telling you, every single time I have to do a material order that was not planned out ahead of time, it just really is a headache. It's a pain. I have to do the takeoff. I have to make sure all the material is correct. I have to send it to the supplier. Then we have to make updates, and it just takes a lot of time. And I've said it before. I've said it on other videos. Most schedules are not delayed by subcontractors. They're delayed by materials not being on site on time. So make sure this is not an issue by creating your scope of work up front with all the material that you need on the project. So we're just talking about a lot of the main pieces of why your scope of work is so important. Your budget, your schedule, your contractors, your material. But we could talk about many other things. We could talk about inspections. We could talk about bidding. We could talk about selections. There are many other reasons why your scope of work is vital to your project management responsibilities. But we'll just keep it at this today, and hopefully this drives a point home. Let me give you a bonus tip before we go. Your scope of work is a living document. It's going to change throughout the project, especially with change orders, because we all know by the end of a project, you're going to have at least a couple change orders. It's going to happen. Don't get discouraged. That's not scope creep. That's just natural. Scope creep is when you have a bunch of change orders and your entire scope of work changes, but it will be evolving throughout the project. So remember, you're going to set it up front, and this is going to dictate your budget, your initial schedule, your working relationships, your material, etc. But it will be changing, so you have to adapt. But the reason it's so important is because now you have a foundation to adapt from. How do you adapt from something that you don't have a foundation of? That's the idea of creating a scope of work up front. Now you have your starting point, and you can make these small changes throughout the project that are natural, not too many changes, and it's going to be a lot easier to decide where we're going, where we've been, and how we're going to get there. Sound good? Hopefully this helps. And to help out some more, in the video description, I do have our scope of work template. This is going to help you with creating scopes of work for a variety of different types of projects. You can use these for cosmetic renovations, full gut renovations, heavy renovations, everything in between. And it really helps guide your way of creating and detailing these scopes of work. If you need more help, we'll also throw some videos in the description of scope of work videos that we've made in the past. Some of these are our most popular videos by far because I think you guys realize how important a scope of work is, especially if you're listening to me. That is something we preach with the Rehabbers Playbook. And if you want to learn more about the Rehabbers Playbook, if you want to dive deeper into a community with tools, training, and support, you can always go into the video description as well. I'm giving you a lot in that video description, but you can go into the description, find the link for TRP, learn more about what we're doing, and then see if you want to join our membership. We would love to have you. You can book a call with me and we can take it from there. That's all I have for today. For now, y'all keep building, keep working. Let me know if you have questions, and I'll see you on the next video.